In the last class, we have discussed about copyright and IPR. Okay, so few of you have missed a class. Only 3 of you were present in the last class, and we have discussed about intellectual property right and various classifications of intellectual property rights, and how indigenous communities are trying to create a regime for themselves in order to save property right for themselves. So we have discussed a few examples also, and today we will also continue whatever is being discussed in that very day. Okay, and I would also like you to participate in the discussion. Okay, so I'd like you to raise questions, also participate, give some examples. Okay, regarding this violation of intellectual property right, regarding the traditional knowledge. So when I say intellectual property right, is a wider gamut of rights. Copyright is a part of intellectual property right. So when we say intellectual property right, it is a right which emerged from the creation of intellectual activity, right? So right that is supposed to be moved by individual or a community, and that emerges from their intellectual activity. So when we say copyright, copyright is a part of intellectual property right, right? So copyright is a part of intellectual property right, and copyright basically includes the literary work, then artistic work, right? As well as sound recording, video recording. We talk about this scientific discoveries. Okay, and when you're talking about this copyright, there are some essential conditions which are also related with this copyright, and those essential conditions are basically related to this economic incentives. So when you have the copyright, you are supposed to have get this economic incentive over the creation that you have made, right? Second is that moral right. So economic incentive is called as economic right. So copyright is related to economic right in that sense, and it has also got different kind of components to make economic interest realizable. Okay, so those components are right to reproduce the work which is already being authored, and right to adaptations, making any adaptations, right to distribute, right to make performance based on the created work. So these are some of the right which will give you economic incentive and which are also related to economic rights. At the same time, we can also see right to rent, or right to share, right to communicate, right to sell the work is also another economic component of economic right. So this is economic right is also associated with copyright. Accordingly, moral right is also associated with moral claim over the work. So moral right is a very important aspect of intellectual property right. So when I say important aspect of intellectual property right, what does moral right actually do? Because intellectual property right is a very bigger concept. Okay, and we do not have a regime of intellectual property right yet, although we have enacted in India, we have enacted a few acts in order to create protection over the inventions and also give economic incentive over the creation. But still there is also a conflict between the traditional right, the ancient view of right, and contemporary view of right. So contemporary view of right is completely different, because we are also living in a digital environment. So the use of digital technology has completely changed the way we create a copy, the way we disseminate, the way we share, the way we communicate, right? And ancient view of right is very, very different, and it is also it is located, it is confined to the writings of law of Manu and even Arthashastra, and also various intellectual skills, military skills, and particular skills of one particular community. So trade of one particular community, and that happens to be kind of intellectual property of that community. those skills have passed from generation to generation, and they have a right, they have a claim over that skills and this community. Suppose a Malakar community is skilled to make, garland, and different kind of garland, not garland of this flower, what I actually come to learn about, my ancestral history. So is that they can make garland of that rice and seeds, okay, and small that edible items also they can make garlands. And garland is also such that very intricately threaded those seeds and all. So apart from other garlands, so that is the skill. So are we, if you look at this community, Kanhar community, who is making the bale item in Sualkuse, that is a Kanhar community. So that is a skill, and that is something which is intellectual property of that community. Brahmin, they are basically the preachers, and they know the Vedas, and that is their intellectual skill. So that's how it is also related to the Sanskritization aspect, which I have discussed earlier. Okay, so Sanskritization and Westernization are two parts of the continuum. So without Sanskritization, you cannot even get to find that upward mobility, and without Westernization also, you cannot get to see that a person is Sanskritized. Okay, so that I have discussed in one class, and I have recorded this, and I will share it to you. So I will not elaborate on the Sanskritization part. But when you talk about the ancient view of intellectual property right, this is actually inherited in those skills which have been transferred. Okay, and in that way, that Varna Dharma system has been established in the society. That a community of people are recognized by means of the skill and occupations they hold, and that occupation and skill is also passed from their generation, okay, from their forefathers, from their fathers. Okay, so that occupation, that skill they have inherited, and that is their property. Okay, so by the 50s, when you talk about this sociologists, they try to look at the disparities and inequalities in the society. They try to find out whether the skills which are available and were justified as a property of one community really establish an equitable society or not. They have given a different view and different lands. So they try to alter the worldview, existing worldview. And in that way, we can get to understand the Sanskritization that apart from the skill which is confined to one community, it can also transfer to another community. So skill can be transferred to another community and give another community also right to upward mobility. So right to move upward on the basis of skill which is acquired. Okay, so like that way, so we also see that society has been changed, and Sanskritization and Westernization are the two factors behind social change. In order to know the social change, you also need to understand these two components. But earlier also there was a view that if you acquire a skill and if you won't pass it to your progeny, you are supposed to suffer from a sin. So that is also kind of view. So you are supposed to pass it to your progeny, you are supposed to pass it to your son, daughter. Okay, somebody has to be there who will learn from you. Okay, so that is a kind of intellectual property, and it is still there in indigenous communities. It is still there, this kind of belief and factor is still there in tribal communities especially, because they do not have a documentation of their knowledge, documentation of their skill set. And yes, in the last class also I have told you that when we are talking about this traditional knowledge of indigenous communities, which also comprises a part of intellectual property rights and rights which have not been acquired, which have not been obtained by the indigenous communities. Okay, by way of their subordinated status, and by way of lack of avenues to get that legal recognitions, by way of that alienation from their own native land. Okay, they could not realize they could not realize and that right to traditional knowledge, right to knowledge, right over their knowledge, or right to have right to copyright over their intangible property. So this is what that traditional knowledge is intangible property. Now what is traditional knowledge? Traditional knowledge is a knowledge of indigenous communities which can be classified as agricultural knowledge, right? Then architectural knowledge, technical knowledge, scientific knowledge, then
cultural knowledge.
That is basically agricultural knowledge. Okay. Okay. Agricultural knowledge. When you talk about culture, culture actually combines all this. Okay. So ecological system, knowledge of ecological system, knowledge of the medicine, knowledge of architecture. Okay. Knowledge of herbs. Okay. Then not any kind of scientific knowledge they do have. Okay, and technical knowledge. So all this classification of knowledges are termed as intellectual property or traditional knowledge of indigenous community. Now when we are talking about indigenous community, okay, so I'll discuss about this copyright part, and we have already discussed about copyright, right? So I might discuss about the infringement of copyright. There are certain provision also, and this is quite rampant, and this is an apparent problem, very alarming problem now in our digital environment. So here we are talking about this indigenous community first. Okay, who are indigenous people, and why do we need to know about them? How will you define indigeneity? Okay, this is very, very important, because if you do not have an accurate definition of indigeneity, you won't get to find an accurate definition of indigeneity. Okay, so how will you define indigeneity first? Before you define this traditional knowledge, it is quite important to understand this indigeneity. So UN, United Nations Organization, has already come up with a definition of indigeneity, and that definition highlighted on three aspects. One aspect is the original inhabitators and original native. United Nations Organization. That is the native, this original native of the land. Now, when you say original native, it doesn't mean the first people who step foot in that land, but also those people who have occupied that territory during the time that territory has been invaded or occupied by foreigners. So in that way, and over the years, who have invaded that territory also become an original inhabitor. Okay, so there are some of the nuances in these definitions, because while saying that original inhabitor or original, that native of one territory, doesn't even define who are original, and original doesn't mean the first people to step foot in this territory. Okay, so those people whose descendants have occupied that territory during the time of foreign invasion will also be considered as these original inhabitants. And at the same time, second aspect highlighted this non-dominant culture. Now it is very, very important, which can be related to my earlier discussion. When I say non-dominant culture, you see, non-dominant culture basically is something which opposed to the larger, the culture of the larger community, or opposed to the mainstream culture. So the inhabitants whose culture is non-dominant also defined as aboriginals, or you say indigenous. So their culture is non-dominant, or their culture is marginalized. That is another aspect which has been highlighted by UN, United Nations Organization. And also UN framework has highlighted another aspect, that is their right to self-identification. Now self-identification is different from right to self-determination, let me tell you. there are two factors like right to self-determination and right to self-identification. Self-identification, the way they like to identify themselves on the basis of their fables, folk songs, folklores, okay, on the basis of their rituals, on spiritual activities. Okay, so self-identify themselves as original or aboriginal or indigenous communities. Okay, so that is also included in the definition of United Nations. So when you say how will you define indigeneity, indigeneity can be defined on the basis of the aboriginal and original, native or inhabitor of that land, and secondly self-identification, thirdly non-dominant culture. So these are these three criteria as per the international instrument to define the indigeneity of that community. Now when you are talking about non-dominant culture, in last two, three classes I have discussed about that counterculture. In one class I have discussed about counterculture also. Counterculture is different from subculture, right? Because counterculture is essentially opposing the revivalist movement and essentially opposing the Western ideas, right? And Western ideas is also dominant in a colonial state. It's very, very dominant because it is with the advent of these Western ideas, we get to learn how to hesitate even, how to seek for reform, right? So Western culture is very, very, I'll say, it is very, very, you say, predominant in a colonial state. So counterculture will always oppose to that Western culture. Counterculture will always oppose to that revivalist cult. Revivalist cult, which is also associated in Majuli, you might see that revivalist cult is also there. Even Vaishnavas, they will oppose it because according to counterculture, they would not like themselves to associate with death symbols. They would not like to associate with themselves with certain, you see, customs which are obsolete. Okay, so in that way also, these indigenous communities are much prone to that counterculture, and you also see they do have that subcultural identity, and they cherish that identity that is a part of self-identification. In most of the people from Arunachal Pradesh, you won't get to find this in Nagaland and Manipur. That culture is not that, subculture and counterculture is not that prevalent. But in Arunachal Pradesh, you get to listen to in Hindi. Now they speak Hindi. They speak in Hindi language, and you also get to find that their way of expression is very different, and that way of expression has much to relate to subculture, the way they slam their hair and all. So you will see. So it's not like that somebody is slamming their hair red or green is one who can claim to be a member of subculture. Not like that. As I have already told you, to be a member of subculture, you need to go through certain stages. Okay, that as I have told you, that affiliation, you have to affiliate it, you have to embrace that ideology, not necessarily you are wearing a dress and you are also growing your hair or getting your hair slamming red or green or blue, or also getting a mohawk, or listening to punk or deadheads. So you won't be a member of subculture. Okay. But yeah, you are very close to subculture. So you might be a posser. You are not punk, you are a posser. P-O-S-E. S-E you are. Okay, like that way. So there is also a difference between the one who is originally punk and can simply identify himself that I am the one who is a member of subculture. And one is also out of a distant interest, he or she can relate to subculture. That I have mentioned in the one class, we go through that video. Okay, now you see that when you are talking about this indigeneity is also linked to that self-identification, and how it is linked to self-identification, how they actually identify themselves with a distinct way of expression. Okay, so not necessarily through their own songs, fables, etc. So I will also ponder on this tattoo culture, and I have already recorded a video lectures last year where I have mentioned about tattoo culture, so that I will share with you, so that also can be relatable. Okay. Uh, then you see, apart from that, when you talk about indigeneity, another aspect of indigeneity is right to self-determination. How self-determination is different from self-identification? Self-determination means your right to choose your own political unit, right to choose own governance, okay, right to decide economic, social, and political fate of the community yourself. So that is what right to self-determination, which is a very important right considered by indigenous community. And this is important in order to have a control over their traditional knowledge. So self-determination right is very, very important in order to have a control over their traditional knowledge, because now that can be related to the problem that indigenous people are facing, the kind of problem that they are facing. You say, what kind of problem? They are often being stripped off from their own land, right, own territories, okay, in the name of conservation even. And you see, their physical properties are also being alienated, like they are actually living on nature for their necessity, right? When physical properties of the nature they're alienated from their land, in a way they are also alienated from their day-to-day necessities. And at the same time, legal avenues, although there are some legislations which have been there, so it was in effect, but it was not enforced properly to protect their rights. Okay, that is also one reason because of which you can see they could not get to have a claim over the knowledge that they have. Now you see, when you are talking about right to self-determination, I have already said that we have a 6th schedule, so that will provide the constitutional protection to the indigenous community, okay, to indigenous people. And most of the time we can also confuse indigenous communities or indigenous people with tribals, right? And tribal definition of ST, scheduled tribe, is actually an official safeguard, or you say officially endowed upon privilege on the community. So they are officially enlisted as a separate group and also endow certain privileges on them. Okay, and because of which most of the communities here in Assam also claiming for ST status. And the tea tribes, you see the condition of the tea tribes, they are also indigenous communities. They claim themselves indigenous community, original inhabitants. Boros, Santals, they are also claiming themselves. Boros are like indigenous. At the same time, you should also know the Sanskritization movement in Boro community. That they have also, there is like Boro community has also undergone by this Sanskritization movement, that is a Brahma movement. It is called this Masboro movement, which took place in Assam in 1907, and that Bodo hesitations and Bodo demand for self-determinations and political right can also be divided into two broad decades. One started from 1947 to 67, when you get to see that they involved in social reform movement, basically reforming the community, reforming the cultures, and then from 67 onwards they have actively participated in the political struggle for self-determination. So, and before that, there was also a Masboro movement, that was Brahma movement, the Sanskritization movement. So they have Sanskritized themselves. So that is also that Christianity, which you get to say spread among this Boro community in Assam. We'll get to it later on. So that is a different aspect altogether. But you see that when you are talking about indigeneity, so everybody is Santal, that tea community, tea garden community is also demanding right to self, not only right to self, not right to self-determination, they are demanding for ST status, right? like scheduled tribe status, because of the privilege, because of this intangible benefits and welfare associated with their status, like SC status, like some social security schemes are also associated. They will be getting that welfare benefit, right? And they will be getting that project on research and development. They will also they will be getting that skill and training opportunities that will also come along with that privileged status. Apart from that, they will also be endowed that affirmative action. Some of this affirmative action with reservation, they will get also reservation in education, that is, and employment, and even in legislation. So these are the regions and factors which also make the indigenous community claiming for SC status. But this is basically an officially prescribed status to endow certain privilege to indigenous community. So when you say ST, scheduled tribe, not SC, ST, scheduled tribe is different from indigenous community. Okay, like tree tribes have been subordinated, have been marginalized for years. Okay. And also when you are talking about the tribe now, so you also need to know about the tribe here when you discuss about this indigenous communities, because they are mostly, we term them as a tribal communities, right? So we also need to know who are the tribes, how many tribes are there. In Assam, we have 23 tribal communities and 14 living in hilly areas and 9 living in plain areas. And Udayan Mishra has divided the tribe into Ottoson and non-Ottoson. Okay, so you also see Ottoson and non-Ottoson tribe is also Ottos. So here actually two tribes comes under this non-Ottoson tribe, and Ottoson tribes are basically tribes who are originally inhabited of this land, who are also living in the hilly and plain areas, and the three tribes come under this non-Ottoson tribe. So here in Assam, we also have some migrant. Now you say when you are talking about this migrant, now when we discuss about the subculture is also equated with this migrant culture. You also in US, subculture is equated with migrant culture also, because they have a different culture. This culture is different from mainstream society, and it opposes the mainstream society in order to create their own identity. Okay, so now it is not like something very despicable when you say migrant culture, because now we are trying to attune with this migrant culture here in land, because there are also different political elements involved. So that is one thing.
But say that in America, USA, it is when we talk about culture, in terms of culture, it is a salad ball, and we
there's multicultural.
multicultural things. So
yeah.
So
okay. Yeah.
So I actually don't understand the concept of subculture when we are talking about already multicultural thing in USA. So every subculture is already mixing with the dominant culture, and it is making a salad ball. We learned it in previous classes.
I've already discussed about subculture, so today I will not discuss subculture, but I will try to address your query. So subculture is also one culture, one part of culture in a wider culture, and basically it is a youth culture. It is a part of youth culture. So you might say a wider and broader framework of culture, that is youth culture, and subculture is a part of youth culture because it is also more related to youth. And at the same time, people also said it's male dominated, it is also pro-Western, and you cannot say that when there is multiculture, there is no subculture. Okay, so it is a culture which is related to their musical interest, related to their use of communication media at the same time, related to the use of machine like motorbike culture, that's a racial culture is also there, right? Then related to a love for music, you see, that is dead hand and babies, okay? So, and punk, these are some of the subculture through which also they reflect their identity. So, and they oppose that mainstream culture, and basically they also have some of the criminal tendencies. So subculture is also, it is said that it's a criminal culture, because they have been marginalized for long. They have been marginalized, they have been deprived of, and they know their marginality, and they try to achieve it by involving themselves in violence also. Okay, but at the same time, they are also peace lovers. Suppose you have that that is hip hop culture is there. They are peace lover. They opposed the Vietnam War. I have told you they opposed Vietnam War. They also seek for peace instead of war. Okay, so but there is also a kind of bias that subculture is a criminal culture and subculture is male dominated, but it lacks justification. It lacks explanation. Okay. So that is it, and you go through the video which I have shared with you. So I'll discuss about multiculture, because in multiculture also we have to discuss lot many things, citizenship right and all. So that is different. But in indigeneity, when we discuss indigeneity, it is whatever I have discussed about right to self-determination, self-identification, non-dominant culture has something to relate to their traditional knowledge, because their knowledge is not being recognized. Okay. Anything to say? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Is geographical
indications
part of intellectual property?
Yeah, it's a part of intellectual property, right? I have discussed about it. Now I'll not go into geographical indication. Geographical indication is a part of intellectual property, like Patent Act is a part of intellectual property right, copyright, trademark, industrial design are part of intellectual property right. So that I have already discussed. Industrial design basically refers to that ornamental and aesthetic element of any design that involves the shape, color, that form, line, outline. Okay, that is also a part of intellectual property right. Okay, industrial design. Patent, that human invention in unique invention which is associated with the already existing phenomenon, means already existing you see plant or species, animal species, plant. So any human intervention human intervention that will make an invention unique, so on which you can claim a patent. Okay, so that is also that patent is also a protection of your invention. So that is a part of intellectual property right. Trademark is also there. That is also that is a mark on good for sale. So unique mark on good for sale. That is also part of intellectual property right. You also have the trade secret. Trade secret is important for smooth running of business and trade. Trade secret is there, like Kentucky, this KFC. You see that food. Fried chicken, they do have like 11 herbs, and people do not know that it contains 11 herbs, and there is a formula also, and which is actually secret, and this formula is made by two groups which are situated in different regions, and they communicate themselves, and they make that formula, and they mix it and remix it, and they put it in the computer and in one place, like that way. So there is a lot of, you see, that rigorosity also involved while making that formula. So, but that is that is kept as secret. Okay. So trade secret is also important. That is also part of intellectual property right. Now you see why we are talking about this traditional knowledge is important. Traditional knowledge is something very unique and distinct. Okay, and it has to be protected, and it has not been protected for long in India. And also that you have asked that a multinational corporation has already appropriated most of the traditional knowledge. And we have case like you see that the turmeric and neem case we have discussed in last class. Now you are talking about the GI. When you are talking about the geographical indications, you see that we have Darjeeling tea, which got that GI. Assam tea, Assam Orthodox got GI. Muga has got GI. Okay. Now you see that in India, first GI came in 2003. First GI, that geographical indication, came in 2003. Okay, so it's important. There is also a geographical indication, that Registration and Protection Act, that came in 1999. Okay, that GI Registration and Protection Act in India. And first GI happened in 2003. Okay, and we also have that, you know that Tirupati Laddu. Tirupati Laddu has also got that GI, and there is also Tirupati Laddu has also a history because it's very famous. You know, Tirumala, Tirupati, Devastanam, that's a temple, and this Laddu is like, you know, Tirupati Laddu is one of the famous laddu and made by people who are living in that temple premises. But because of this demand of Tirupati laddu, you see, other hawkers and people outside the community also started preparing the laddu and selling it. And you see, selling it unauthorized way. Okay, and then you see this temple premises, they do have a surveillance and vigilance wing, security wing, and they actually they also tried to catch those people, and they have claimed for GI, they applied for GI, and in that way, once they got the GI, they could now they are allowed to take any legal action against those who are violator of the GI. Sort of GI is something which is very specific to their, like, you know, their premise, their region. Okay, basically it is specific to their region. Okay, and then you also have Aramala, that Aranmala, that is a mirror. Aranmala Kannadi.
Yes.
Aranmala Kannadi is a mirror. That is like, you know, that is also created.
It's for very long, the mirror.
Yeah, that is specific to Kerala. Okay, and this community, this is actually made by a community. This community who made the mirror has been brought from you see, Tamil Nadu. That is an area called Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu, from where this community who made the mirror, who has been making the mirror, were brought to Kerala in order to make mirror, and who bought them? The Raja of Travancore 500 years ago bought them. Okay, and they have been engaging with these professions, and nobody can actually make that mirror because this is a very distinct mirror. It also, you say, comprises some tin and copper, and surface, unlike the surface of other mirror which reflects, it has a different kind of, like, you know, apparatus and mechanism. So and it needs a lot of, like, you know, hardship to make that mirror. But you see that community has also got recognitions, and that community now, you see, that mirror is very costly. Everybody, like everyday people, cannot buy it. Okay, only elite can buy that mirror. In that way, this community is earning, like, you know, good sum of money. But still, there is a question whether they will, like, transfer the knowledge to the to their progeny or not, to the next generation or not.
I've seen a documentary. Presently, there are around 10 to 20 people making that mirror, and this upcoming generation is more interested towards work in industries rather than making
they
the
can.
mirror.
Yeah, that is the question.
There was a, like,
Now that is a question actually. So regarding the like, you know, transfer of skill to a community. Now this skill has actually been, you see, this become endangered now. Okay, so, and it is not documented also, and hence you see, multinational corporation can appropriate it so easily. Okay, with the intervention of technology, not human intervention. By human intervention, also by organization, but by technological intervention, they can appropriate the skills and property. Okay, that is one thing. Now, when you are talking about, okay, it's fine then, we are talking about copyright infringement. Okay, infringement. Copyright is a part of intellectual property right. We have discussed what it covers. When you talk about copyright infringement, there are different type of copyright infringement. You also know about, like in cinematography. Will sir take class?
Yes.
So let me finish it. Wait for 15 minutes. Okay. So when you are talking about copyright infringement, so you have infringement of cinematographic film. So in terms of cinematographic film, filmmaking is not something which is an individual job. And there are a lot of you see nitty-gritties will come while raising for copyright violations or raising a claim for copyright infringement, because a lyricist will involve, sound recordist will involve, music composers will also involve. At the same time, that script maker is also involved, so which will have a designation of literary work. Then music composer have a designation of musical work. Then graphic designer will have a designation of artwork within this copyright, right? At the same time, so you also have music composer. That composer is also part of not musical work but a literary work. So right that way it will cover. Now the thing is that you see now digital technology has already made the all these films available, and before it is released on even theater, you get to find. Now you see that there are some aspect of violation or infringement of copyright on cinematographic film. First is the imitation of stage play or imitation of theater play. So most of the time, if a film is an imitation of theater play, so these are some of the important aspect and controversial aspect which require arguments. So you also see that many times a film when becomes an imitation of theater play or street play, can you actually claim for infringement of copyright or not? So here actually what is important is that the form, manner, expression and arrangement, that is actually important, I'll tell you, in order to understand the copyright violation, rather than finding the similarities between the theme, principles and ideas. So as you also know that ideas cannot be copyrighted, your principles cannot be copyrighted, right? Historical facts cannot be copyrighted, legendary facts cannot be copyrighted, subject matter cannot be copyrighted. So what you can actually identify here, what you can look for is the form and manner, the two two scenes are being presented, and the way it is being expressed, the way two scenes are arranged, so that can also lead to violation of or infringement of copyright, or you can have a claim of copyright. And most of the time here, in terms of, you see, the Copyright Act, that is also part of intellectual property right, and in even one class we cannot stop discussing about this copyright because you see when we talk about this copyright, we have some of the international instrument also which try to promote the protection of intellectual property right as well as copyright through international collaboration and cooperation between the member state of this UN as well as between international organizations. And one such important instrument is that WIPO, I have discussed, World Intellectual Property Organization, that came in 1979. Okay, that is an international instrument. Okay, before infringement of copyright, I'll discuss about this international instrument which are trying to protect copyright and intellectual property right. It's important. I cannot discuss all the instrument, at least a few instrument I can discuss, and you will go through those instruments. You will find out detail about those instruments. There are little variations in between two instruments. So one is WIPO, this is what you see, 1979, that came in order to promote the protection of copyright, through collaboration and cooperation among international organizations and member state of United Nations organization. Okay, and then also it wants to promote administrative control over the whole intellectual property regime. And second is, you might know about the Berne Convention. Berne Convention is important. Berne Convention is, I think it is 18. This is before that. Berne Convention. So Berne Convention actually recognize the use of copyrighted work. Use of copyrighted work in the sense it has given permission to use a quote from any copyrighted material for literary work. Suppose you are writing a thesis, you are writing dissertations. So you can also quote an author from a copyrighted material. Okay, so that permission has given by Berne Convention. So it was mentioned, but in that convention there is no mention about you say free use, public or public welfare. So these are some of the terminologies which are, or terminologies or concepts which are very, very important and associated, and intrinsically related to, you see, copyright. Okay, the free use concept is there, free use, fair use concept. Okay, public domain concept or public interest concept, balance, which is very, very important. So these are intrinsically related to copyright. So this very international instrument so have also made some advances in the realization of copyright with their different you say different administrative control, which guiding different administrative control. And after Berne Convention, we also have another that is called NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Okay, so in NAFTA we get to find the importance of North American Free Trade Agreement. We also have WCT.
So what is the F? What does the F stands for?
Free Trade Agreement.
Free Trade Agreement.
You actually see the importance of intellectual property right came during this Uruguay Roundtable, that is a general agreement of free trade and tariff GATT. Okay, so and when there is a formation of World Trade Organization. So importance of copyright or importance of intellectual property right was realized during this Uruguay round of convention, GATT convention. Okay, so that is also there. So WCT and that World Intellectual Property Right, World Intellectual Property Organization Copyright Treaty, as I have already discussed. So these are some of the development, and they have worked on what public is. It has worked on that's what public interest or public domain. Interest, public domain, and some developments have been. I will tell you, NAFTA is not that important because it simply put emphasis on protection, not on free use, not on public welfare. Okay, only on protection. Free trade agreement to protect this intellectual property right and protect this material, protect the trade. Okay. So then Berne Convention emphasizes on copyright aspect, but doesn't emphasize on free access or free use. Okay. Now when you are talking about this copyright, as we say, what is important is where? Where? Sir is taking class there? Students are come? wait sometime. Okay, so you see that when I'll tell you this because I have started late, no? I've started late.
Yeah.
Okay, so where I was?
NAFTA and burn, which is like more into copyright aspect, and then you said you'll go to the next topic.
Next topic, okay. Okay, so one important aspect of copyright is the freedom of distribution and communication and freedom of reproductions, right? That right to reproduction and right to communication. So that is a right actually. Copyright is essentially related to right to reproduction and right to communication and right to distribution. Okay, so right to communication and right to distribution. So these are the important provision, important aspect of copyright. Okay, so right to reproduction is there. So what do you mean by right to reproduction? Means right to copy, right? So initially, right to copy during the advent of printed, printing technology, we get to see the flourishing of copyright laws across the world, and importance of copyright has been realized with the advent of printing technologies when we have literary works in our hand to protect those literary works. So right to reproduce basically in that era limited or confined to getting a book published in a way. But now in the digital era, right to reproduction is basically related to copying by electronic means, okay, and to save it in random access memory. Okay, that is what is right to reproduction. So it's very, very important and common even like the definition. Right to communicate and distribution is a messy concept because now you actually see with the advent of digital technology, it is easier to communicate and distribute. And even music industry at the same time has earned revenue and suffered a lot because of right to communicate and distribution, because of this infringement of sound recording. It's easy to make a new collections, copy from the legitimate sources, make a new collection of, and make a new package, and then sell and distribute. And pirated music are also available, and basically those music are sold in those music collections are sold in even Pakistan, Bangladesh, in other territories where beyond the nation where those music, Indian film music are popular. And we have also lost a revenue of 450 crore because of this infringement of sound recording. And because of this infringement of Cinematographic Act, which is also related to right to reproduction and right to communication distribution, that is a right at the same time. And it can also be related to Creative Commons, let me tell you. That I'll come. Creative Commons, which is very, very important because that has also given a balance to the right of the author and right of the user. Try to balance and try to sift the bargain between this right of the author and the right of the users, that copyleft movement or Creative Commons. So Creative Commons movement has actually came into effect, or it has been popularized, that movement has been popularized during 2001. And I will finish it and I'll let you go because I have already missed many classes and you also tend not to come.
Can you repeat the previous statement?
Okay.
In 2001 creative.
Okay. That is also related to the copyleft movement. Okay. So I'll come to it. So copyleft movement is also something related to right to reproduction, right to communication and distribution. So when you say copyleft movement or Creative Commons, Creative Commons. Creative Commons or copyleft movement. author and right of user, and it has shifted the bargain from author to user. Shifted the bargain from author to users, and there are a few scholars who are associated with this movement. One is Lawrence Lessig. Lawrence Lessig is one who is a law professor in Stanford University. Lawrence Lessig. Lawrence Lessig, then James Ball, then you have research Stallman. Okay, so you see research Stallman, Lawrence Lessig, then you have also James Ball. They are associated with this copyleft movement or Creative Commons. Why are you smiling? Okay, you have understood, no? So, okay, so it has tried to create that balance between the author and the review. And you see author and the users, and you see there is a very famous book that is The Future of Ideas, the Fate of Commons in a Connected World. Future of Ideas, the Fate of Commons in a Connected World. So you can also read that book. You can buy Ideas, the Fate of Commons in a Connected World, 2001. That was published in 2001. It was published in 2001. So, so it's by Lawrence Lessig. So it might be available online also. So you can also get a copy. You go through that. So you will get to understand the detail of Creative Commons. It refers to a project basically, which tried to shift the balance from author to users on the basis of certain conditions. Now you need to focus on those conditions. What are the conditions? Condition is that provided you attribute the author, first condition. Second condition is that provided you attribute that author, provided that you will not make any derivative work from that piece of work. Derivative work in the sense that once the copy is available on the net, you are not supposed to make a different work and a substantial work made out of it and to use it for commercial purpose. Provided you don't use it for commercial purpose, that is also another condition. Yeah, Ruxita?
Attribute the author, so basically in a thesis or dissertation we give a reference
Right.
that is
Attribute. So attribution is there because it has also incorporated in Berne Convention that you can quote anyone by attributing. You can quote any author from a copyrighted material.
That was in the
Berne Convention is there. You can quote there. That is also permissible. So quote is permissible. Quote is permissible, but here you are talking about attributing the name. So if you are using the material, you attribute the name of the author, their their effort of the effort of the author. You attribute the effort of the author. Then second condition is that you cannot make any commercial use. So you can make you see this Creative Commons has also allowed you to use the work for certain purpose, allow you to use the work for teaching purpose, for legal and judicial purpose, even for, you see, for any other non-commercial work, for academic, for teaching, for legal, judicial purpose, you can use that work, but you cannot use it for commercial purpose. Okay, so in like academics also now we use those materials for even teaching purpose, for making students learn. So there are certain issues even in academics, the copyright related issues, how far we can make photocopy, to what extent you can make photocopy. Okay, because now you see the photocopy machine, the scanners and DVD, CDs are available, and it can make multiple copies so rapidly and in a cost effective way, and they can transmit number of copies. Again, it leads to violation of copyright, right? So here you see reproduction is also very easier. So Creative Commons has already stressed on focus on right to reproduction and focused on right to communication and distribution. But certain condition has been given. Attribute, you need to attribute. Second is that you cannot make any derivative work for your own profit. Okay, derivative work, you are making very substantive work out of the existing work, and you have sold it for profit, for earning profit. And second is that you can even copy, cut, paste, remix, and that is allowed. Okay, that you can do. Okay, cut to copy, remix of any song, that is also allowed by this Creative Commons. And it is also related to, you see, some of the technological protection measures, TPM. Okay, so when you are talking about digital right management, so how will you manage digital right? So this is actually a question which is posed by Creative Commons. Okay, how will you manage digital right? So you can manage digital right through watermarking and through encryption, right? Encryption, when your copying is inevitably, eventually be decrypted at the end of the user, and through watermarking, that is a rigorous, activity on the part of those watermarking designer. There are also some watermarking designer, so they will compress the file and they will watermark it and also make it less susceptible to copy. So that's how you can make it. But Creative Commons is a copyleft movement. It is also an aspect of open source movement, and it is a part of JNU General Public License. So if you want to GNU and General Public License. So if you want to make your copy available in Creative Commons platform, you need to acquire GPL, General Public License. Okay.
What's GNU?
GNU, that is, I forgot, that is, you find out. It is simply written GNU. That is a GNU, General Public License. So GNU, to find out that GNU. Okay. It is actually, it has started with the GNU movement. It is basically an open source movement. Open source movement or open access movement, open access of software movement. And it is also, related to advent of digital technologies. You see, now advent of digital technology has made infringement of software very easier. Okay, when you say infringement of software, you see, in a proprietary model, so proprietary model, initially we have a proprietary model where source code is not even shared with the users. So we won't get to see the source code of the software, and we need to pay heavy amount in order to use that software for our day-to-day purpose, right? That was in proprietary model, but in open access movement, software code is accessible and available for users. So you can also make any improvement in that software. So you can also track any error if it is there in that software, or you can make improvement and you can share that software with others so that others can also generally use that software. Okay, and Creative Commons movement goes parallelly open access movement. Okay. At the same time, you also see that when we are infringement of software, that is also violation of copyright. Now you see that infringement can also happen in 5 ways. Through counterfeiter, okay, it can happen 5 ways. Through counterfeiter, through reseller, okay.
Can you note it down?
Okay. Through infringement of copyright, how it can happen? infringement of software, which can happen. So in even proprietary model. So in proprietary model, as software code is not accessible, so it actually leads to infringement and violation of software. And how it can be possible? Through counterfeiting. Counterfeiter are those who make a copy of a genuine software. This is a fake version of genuine software and make it available. Okay. Then through reselling. Through reselling, this is also possible, and through counterfeiter, through reselling, through being ordered, and then vendor also. The bulletin board is one. Bulletin board. So counterfeiter when a fake copy of this software is included. That is a bulletin board. Bulletin board is a website nowadays. There are a number of websites which will give you a cracked version. This is called Juarez, or you see this Kozigen one, cracked version of the software, and you will copy it and install it. So that's what. And bulletin board has been replaced by a number of websites nowadays available who are selling the cracked version and Kozigen and Juarez version of the software. Okay. Then this reselling is there. Reselling when you actually illegally or unauthorized way, when you make a copy of the software illegally, or when you make a copy of the software in an unauthorized way and sell it. Okay. Unauthorized way in DVD and DVD and sell it along with hardware, any hardware components. Suppose we are buying a computer, so we are also getting a CD of the software. Okay, so many a time this is called reselling. So okay, so that's how also it can be related to infringement of copyright. So there are different conditions which will lead to violation of copyright. Mail order to sharing the link of the software. Okay, that's how you can also violate the copyright. And you see, street vendors are nowadays, they are selling the duplicate copy of the software to make it available. So, and hence it is important to emphasize on copyleft movement of Creative Commons, because it has shifted the balance to users and also allow us to reproduce, to disseminate, to even communicate the software, even soft code. Okay, apart from literary work, musical work, sound recording and everything. Okay, I'll finish it short because I could also see the attention span of the student.